The moment my stepmother walked into the attorney's office with a stranger at her side, I knew exactly what she was about to do. I just didn't know she'd already made the worst mistake of her life by doing it. My father had been gone for 11 days. 11 days of casseroles left on the porch by neighbors, of fielding phone calls from his old colleagues at Hargrove Engineering, of sitting in the house he'd built piece by piece over 30 years and trying to understand how someone so permanent could simply stop existing. Robert Ellison had been the kind of man who fixed things, not just in the literal sense, though he'd rebuilt the engine of my first car in that garage and rewired the entire second floor of this house himself. He fixed problems. He called you back. He showed up. Losing him at 61 to pancreatic cancer felt less like a death and more like a structural collapse, like something foundational had given way beneath everything I thought I understood about the world. I was 38 years old and I had never felt more like an orphan. The reading of his will was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the offices of Caldwell and Associates, the firm my father had used for his estate planning for over 20 years. I arrived early, the way my father had always taught me to. 15 minutes before any meeting means you respect the other person's time, Claire. That was his rule, and I kept it even then, even on a morning when sitting in the gray upholstered chair across from Mr. Caldwell's assistant felt surreal enough to make me dizzy. My stepmother arrived 7 minutes late. She knew I would be there early. I had always suspected she found some satisfaction in that. But it wasn't her lateness that made the air leave my lungs. It was the man walking beside her. He was perhaps 28 or 29, with sandy brown hair and the kind of lean, restless energy that made him look like he couldn't decide whether to run or stay still. He wore a jacket that was slightly too large in the shoulders, and he held a manila envelope against his chest the way someone holds something they're afraid will be taken from them. I had never seen him before in my life. My stepmother guided him to the chair beside her with the practiced calm of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment. She set her purse on the table with a small, deliberate click and looked across at me with an expression I can only describe as satisfied grief. The kind of face that is performing sorrow while celebrating something underneath. "Claire," she said, as though we were friends. "I'm glad you're here. There's something important we need to address before Mr. Caldwell begins." I looked at the man beside her. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "This is my stepmother's guest," I said carefully, directing the words to Mr. Caldwell rather than to her. I wasn't aware additional parties would be present today. Mr. Caldwell, who had known my father since I was a teenager, and had the measured composure of a man who had witnessed every possible variety of human difficulty, folded his hands on the table. He looked at my stepmother with the polite, unreadable expression of someone who had already been briefed and found the briefing troubling. "Perhaps we should allow everyone to be seated," he said. My stepmother did not wait for that invitation. She placed her hand on the young man's arm and said, in a voice pitched perfectly to Carrie, "This is Marcus. He is Robert's biological son. From a relationship before your mother. He only recently learned the truth, and he has documentation to prove it. A DNA test." She paused to let that settle. "I think, out of fairness, we all need to understand what that means for the estate before anything is read." The manila envelope went onto the table. I looked at it. I looked at Marcus, who had finally lifted his eyes to mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected. Not greed, exactly. Confusion, maybe, the particular look of someone who has been told a story so many times they've started to believe it but aren't completely sure they should. I thought about the envelope in my own bag. The one that had been there for 4 months, growing heavier every time I checked to make sure it was still there. "Play it," I said. Those 2 words didn't come yet. That moment was still coming. But I knew it was coming, and that knowledge was the only thing that kept my hands perfectly still on the table. My father married my stepmother 2 years before he died. I want to be fair about that. I want to say what is true, which is that in the beginning, I tried. She was organized and capable and she made him laugh, and watching him laugh after the years of quiet following my mother's death was enough to make me overlook a lot. I swallowed my unease at how quickly she had moved into his house. I let go of my discomfort when she began referring to his retirement accounts in conversation, casually, as though the numbers in them were already hers. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself grief had made me possessive of my father in ways that weren't healthy or fair. But then his diagnosis came. Stage 4, inoperable, and the clock on all of it became suddenly and brutally visible. What changed in my stepmother after that diagnosis was not subtle. It was not something I could explain away as stress or fear or the reasonable terror of watching a spouse deteriorate. It was a shift in atmosphere. The house felt different when I visited. My father seemed different, quieter, more careful with his words, watching her the way a person watches weather. During the last 3 months of his life, she began managing his visitors. He was tired. He wasn't up for company. The hospice nurse was already there and it was too crowded. My father's oldest friend, a man who had worked alongside him at Hargrove for 30 years and who I had called Uncle Frank since I was 6 years old, told me later that he had tried to visit 4 times in those final months. He was turned away each time. I was allowed in twice a week, for exactly 1 hour, with my stepmother present in the room. I started recording our conversations on my phone. Not because I planned anything. Not because I was already thinking about envelopes and attorneys and the particular satisfaction of a trap closing. I did it because I was afraid of losing him twice, once when he died, and again when someone began rewriting who he had been. I recorded him talking about my mother, about the house, about the summer we drove to Colorado in his old truck and got caught in a hailstorm outside Denver and laughed until we couldn't breathe. I recorded him because the man I was visiting felt more and more like a man being carefully managed, and I wanted proof that he had existed, that we had existed, in some form that couldn't be edited. It was during the 4th of those visits that my father took my hand and held it for a long time before speaking. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to do something with it." He was thin by then. The big hands that had fixed engines and rewired houses were still, finally, and his voice had the quality of someone measuring out what he had left carefully. He told me about a phone call he had received 6 weeks earlier from a woman he had briefly dated 40 years ago, before he ever met my mother. He told me this woman claimed they had a son together. He told me she had died recently and that her son Marcus had found letters and photographs and had reached out. He told me that my stepmother had intercepted the call, had spoken to Marcus before my father had a chance to, had arranged something. "I never met him," my father said. "She told me he needed time, that she was handling it. But Claire, something doesn't feel right. Something about the whole thing doesn't feel right." He had ordered a DNA test himself, quietly, through his physician's office. He had asked Dr. Harrison to process it without telling my stepmother. A hair sample from himself. A cheek swab collected, at my father's very careful request, from a glass Marcus had used during his single visit to the house, a visit my father had not been told about in advance. A visit that had lasted 45 minutes while my father rested upstairs. He told me the results had come back. Marcus was not his son. He handed me the results in a sealed envelope from Dr. Harrison's office and he asked me to keep them safe until they were needed. I drove home that evening and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. I thought about what my father had just given me. Not just a document, a warning. Issued by a dying man who was too exhausted to fight but refused to leave me defenseless. I added the results to the envelope I was already carrying. And I waited. Sitting in Mr. Caldwell's office now, watching my stepmother slide that manila envelope across the polished table with the confident gesture of someone playing a card they believe is unbeatable, I felt everything my father had given me settle into place. Marcus spoke for the first time. His voice was younger than I expected, uncertain at the edges in a way that suggested he had been coached more than convinced. "I don't want to cause problems," he said, which is precisely the thing people say when they are about to cause problems. "I just want what's fair." She told me he would have wanted me recognized. I said. "My stepmother told you that." He nodded. "Did you ever speak to my father directly?" A pause. She said he was too sick. That it would upset him. I looked at my stepmother. She was watching me with an expression of practiced compassion, her hands folded, her posture suggesting someone who has done a difficult thing for the right reasons. "Marcus," I said, "how long ago did you find those letters and photographs?" He thought about it. "About 8 months ago." My father had been alive 8 months ago. He had been diminished but not incapacitated. He had been managing his own affairs and meeting with Mr. Caldwell to revise his estate documents and watching football on Sunday afternoons with the volume too loud because he'd always been slightly vain about his hearing. He was alive and reachable 8 months ago, and Marcus had apparently spent those 8 months communicating exclusively through my stepmother. I reached into my bag. Mr. Caldwell, who had been watching this exchange with the careful attention of a man who understood that what happened in the next several minutes would matter enormously, straightened slightly in his chair. The envelope I set on the table was thicker than the one my stepmother had produced. It had been sitting in the inside pocket of my bag since my father handed it to me, and I had checked for it every morning the way you check for your keys. It was creased at one corner and the seal had been reinforced with a strip of clear tape that my father had pressed down himself with his thumb. "Before we open anything," I said, "I'd like Mr. Caldwell to hear something." My stepmother's composure flickered. It was brief, a tightening around the eyes, a slight compression of the lips, but I had been watching her for 2 years and I knew what her tells looked like. "This is not the time for theatrics," she said. "I agree completely," I said. "That's why I'd like to keep this straightforward." I took out my phone and set it on the table and pressed play. My father's voice came out of that small speaker with a clarity that made the room feel suddenly smaller. It was the voice I had known my entire life, the one that had read to me at bedtime and called me every Sunday morning for 38 years and told me once, during a drive through the Colorado mountains during a hailstorm, that the only thing that mattered about a person was whether they showed up when it counted. "My darling Claire, if you're playing this, then I wasn't wrong about what was coming, and I'm sorry you have to be sitting in that room. I need you to know some things, and I need to say them out loud so there's no confusion later about what I meant or what I wanted." The recording I had made of that final real conversation in his bedroom was 42 minutes long. I had edited it to 11, cutting out the silences and the moments when his breathing had labored and the parts that were only for me. What remained was my father, in his own voice, with the timestamp and date visible on the phone screen, saying clearly and without hesitation that he had never met or spoken directly with anyone named Marcus, that he had been told by his wife that Marcus was being handled, that when he had asked to speak with Marcus personally, he had been told the young man was not ready. That something about the entire situation felt orchestrated in a way he could not fully articulate but could not ignore. He said that he had obtained DNA test results through his physician. He gave the name of the laboratory and the date the results were processed. He said the results were in a sealed envelope he was giving to his daughter, and that she should give them to James Caldwell. He said that he loved me. He said it the way he always said things that mattered, simply, without decoration, looking you directly in the eye even through a phone recording. My stepmother did not make a sound during the 11 minutes that recording played. Marcus stared at the phone on the table with an expression that had caved in on itself somewhere around the 3rd minute. "Mr. Caldwell listened with his pen set down and his hands folded and his face holding the careful neutrality of a man exercising significant professional discipline. When it ended, the silence in that office was the specific silence of something having been decided. "Those tests are from months ago," my stepmother said. Finally. Her voice had changed. The warm, managed quality was gone. What was underneath it was harder and less polished. "Robert wasn't well. His judgment was compromised by the medication. Dr. Harrison is prepared to speak to my father's cognitive state during that period," I said. "He was managing his own affairs and revising legal documents until 6 weeks before his death. Mr. Caldwell can speak to that as well." Mr. Caldwell confirmed this with a single nod. I opened the envelope. The DNA results were from Veritas Diagnostics, a fully accredited laboratory with legal admissibility certification. I had known what they said for 4 months. Reading them aloud now, in that room, with Marcus sitting across from me in his too large jacket, still felt like something opening rather than closing. The first document, DNA comparison between Claire Ellison and Robert Ellison using samples certified through Dr. Harrison's office. Probability of biological relationship as father and daughter, 99.96%. My father's daughter, definitively and legally. The second document, DNA comparison between Marcus Holt and Robert Ellison, using the sample collected from the glass Marcus had used during his visit to the house, properly documented in Dr. Harrison's files. Probability of biological relationship, 0%. Not Robert Ellison's son. Not a match in any category. Marcus put both his hands flat on the table. I watched him process it. I watched the moment when the story he had been given for 8 months began to separate from the reality of what was actually true. He turned to my stepmother and he looked at her the way people look at someone when they realize they have been used rather than helped, and it was a look I almost felt sorry about witnessing. "You told me he was my father," Marcus said. Not accusing, exactly. More like a person who has woken up in the wrong place and is trying to map where the wrong turn happened. "DNA tests can be manipulated," my stepmother said. She was no longer looking at Marcus. She was looking at Mr. Caldwell with the focused energy of someone who has decided that the only play left is to attack the referee. She planned this. She's been building this case for months because she knew Robert was going to do the right thing and acknowledge his son. My father spent his final months in the same house as you, I said. He had 1 hour with me twice a week, always supervised. He managed, in those 1-hour windows, to speak to his physician privately, to obtain these results, and to give them to me with instructions. He did all of that carefully, deliberately, and in secret. Ask yourself what that says about the conditions he was living in. The words went into the room and stayed there. Mr. Caldwell opened his briefcase. I believe, he said, in the measured tone of a man who has been saving his authority for precisely this moment, that this is the appropriate time to read the will. My stepmother's attention snapped to him. Whatever calculation she had been running behind her eyes stopped. The most recent document, Mr. Caldwell continued, was executed in this office 8 weeks before Robert's death, in the presence of 2 independent witnesses, both notarized. I can confirm that he was legally and cognitively competent at the time of signing, and that I personally documented his clarity of mind for exactly the reason he suspected would become relevant. He changed it, she said. Not a question. He updated it, yes. Significantly. My stepmother stood up. It was not dramatic, exactly. It was the movement of someone whose body has decided to leave before the mind has caught up. I will contest this. I have attorneys. I have years of documented marriage and I have rights. You are welcome to consult an attorney, Mr. Caldwell said. That is entirely your right. However, I'd encourage you to do so before making statements in this office that you may later regret. She looked at me. For one moment the managed composure was completely gone, and what was underneath it was not the malice I had expected. It was something smaller and more desperate, the face of someone who had made a series of choices that had seemed reasonable one by one and had arrived, somehow, at this room. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left that needed saying. She picked up her purse. She did not look at Marcus again. When the door closed behind her, the room was very quiet for a moment. Marcus was still sitting in his chair. He had both hands in his lap now and he was looking at the table with the expression of someone going through an inventory of everything he thought he knew. I didn't know, he said. I want you to understand that. I believe you, I said. And I did. That was the thing about my stepmother's methods. They worked because she was careful about who she chose to involve. She had told Marcus a story that was plausible and emotionally compelling: a dying man, a secret son, a family that deserved to know the truth. She had kept Marcus and my father carefully separated, feeding each of them a version of the other that confirmed whatever she needed it to confirm. She had done the same to me, to my father, to Uncle Frank, to every person whose presence might have complicated her plan. The difference was that my father had seen it coming. And unlike what my stepmother had assumed about the man she had married, being quiet was not the same as being unprepared. Mr. Caldwell read the will in its entirety. It was detailed in the way my father was always detailed. He believed in specificity, in the precision of language, in making sure that what he meant was what he said. The house, the investment accounts, the company stock, the tools he had collected over 40 years of engineering work, the old truck he refused to sell because he said it still had good miles left, all of it came to me. The reading took 20 minutes and at the end of it I sat in that gray upholstered chair with my father's handwriting visible on one of the attached personal notes, and I felt something in my chest that had been braced against an impact for months slowly, carefully release. There was a paragraph near the end that Mr. Caldwell read in a voice that was only slightly less composed than the rest. My father had written it himself and asked that it be included verbatim. To my daughter Claire, you are the best thing I ever built. I don't say that lightly. I spent my career engineering structures designed to bear weight, and I spent my best years watching you become someone who does the same. I am sorry for the time I didn't protect you better. I am not sorry for any moment I spent as your father. Take the truck. It has good miles left. I sat in my car in the parking lot of Caldwell and Associates for a long time before driving home. I called Uncle Frank and told him it was done. He cried on the phone, which made me cry, and we stayed on the line together for a while without talking, which is something you can do when you have known someone your whole life. My stepmother's attorney contacted Mr. Caldwell's office 6 days later with an initial letter contesting the will on grounds of undue influence. Mr. Caldwell, who had anticipated this precisely, responded with the documented record of my father's cognitive assessments, the witness signing, the audio recording, the DNA results, and a politely worded note indicating that he looked forward to the discovery process. The contest was withdrawn within 2 weeks. Marcus sent me an email 3 weeks after the will reading. It was short and clearly difficult to write. He said he had done his own research after that morning and had found inconsistencies in the story he'd been told, dates that didn't align, letters that had been edited in ways he hadn't noticed before. He said he was sorry for his part in it, however unwitting. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I wrote back. I told him the truth, which was that I didn't blame him and that I hoped he was okay too. I meant both things. I moved back into the house the following month. My stepmother had taken some things when she left, small items, a set of dishes, a decorative mirror that had been in the living room, but most of it was exactly as my father had left it. His coffee mug was still in the dish rack. His reading glasses were folded on the side table next to his chair. His engineering books were stacked on the shelf in the order he had always kept them, spines aligned, the older ones slightly more worn. His workshop was the last place I went. It smelled the same as it always had, machine oil and cedar, and the particular dusty warmth of a room that has been worked in for decades. His tools were hung on the pegboard walls in the organized system he had developed over 30 years, each one in its precise place. There was a project on the workbench, a small cabinet he had been building for my apartment, that he hadn't been able to finish. The wood was sanded smooth and 2 of the 4 joints were fitted. On the bench beside it, under a folded piece of cloth, was an envelope with my name written in his careful engineer's handwriting. I sat down in his chair. I opened it. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, dated 5 days before he was admitted to hospice. His handwriting was less steady than it had been, but entirely legible. He wrote about my mother, who he had loved for 24 years and missed every day since. He wrote about the truck and the specific way you have to pump the gas pedal twice before starting it in cold weather or it will flood. He wrote about the summer we drove to Colorado and the hailstorm outside Denver, and how he had thought in that moment that a life that contained laughter like that could not possibly be considered anything but full. He wrote, "I know what's coming in that office. I know because I know how she thinks, and I know because I know you. You will have handled it. You have always known how to handle things when they matter, and I want you to know that I have watched you do that your entire life, and it has been one of the great privileges of mine. Whatever happened in that room, you handled it. I am certain of this." I sat in his chair in his workshop with the late afternoon light coming through the single window, and I read that letter twice, and then I folded it carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. Outside, his truck sat in the driveway. It had good miles left. He was right about that, and he was right about everything else. And I sat there in the quiet of the room he had built, and I let myself understand, fully and without reservation, that he had known who I was all along. Even at the end, even from a distance, even through everything she had put between us, he had known. And he had made sure I would know it too. Before I go, I want to thank you for being here for stories like this one. If you believe that love finds a way through even the most deliberate attempts to erase it, please consider subscribing. It's free. And it means these stories reach the people who need them. What moment hit you hardest in this one? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one.